I believe that the law of the land is as spoken by the Supreme Court, and that if we disagree with the Supreme Court, and occasionally I do, then we have a process under the Constitution to change that decision, and it's known as the amendment process. And where we have, for instance, right now, we're having issues that relate to same-sex marriage. My view is we should have a federal amendment of the Constitution defining marriage as a relationship between a man and a woman.
Yahoo sends us questions, as you know. We have them from real viewers. And I'd like to post one because it is about gay marriage, but at the level, and I would really love to be able to ask you what you would say personally, sitting in your living rooms, to the people who ask questions like this. This is from Phil in Virginia. Given that you oppose gay marriage, what do you want gay people to do who want to form loving, committed, long-term relationships? What is your solution? And Speaker Gingrich?
Well, I think what I would say is that we want to make it possible to have those things that are most intimately human between friends occur. For example, you're in a hospital. If there are visitation hours, should you be allowed to stay there? There ought to be ways to designate that. You want to have somebody in your will. There ought to be ways to designate that. But it is a huge jump from being understanding and considerate and concerned, which we should be, to saying we're therefore going to institute the sacrament of marriage as though it has no basis. The sacrament of marriage was based on a man and woman, has been for 3,000 years, is at the core of our civilization, and is something worth protecting and upholding. And I think protecting and upholding that doesn't mean that you have to go out and make life miserable for others, but it does mean you make a distinction between a historic sacrament of enormous importance in our civilization and simply deciding it applies everywhere and it's just a civil right. It's not. It is a part of how we define ourselves, and I think that a marriage between a man and a woman is part of that definition.
Governor Huntsman, you've talked about civil unions. How do you disagree with the others on the stage?
Well, personally, I think civil unions are fair. I support them. I think there's such a thing as equality under the law. I'm a married man. I've been married for 28 years. I have 7 kids. Glad we're off the contraception discussion. 15 minutes worth, by the way. And I don't feel that my relationship is at all threatened by civil unions. On marriage, I'm a traditionalist. I think that ought to be saved for one man and one woman. But I believe that civil unions are fair. And I think it brings a level of dignity to relationships. And I believe in reciprocal beneficiary rights. I think they should be part of civil unions as well. And states ought to be able to talk about this. I think it's I think it's absolutely appropriate.
I'd like to go to Senator Santorum with a similar topic. We're in a state where it is legal for same-sex couples to marry. 1,800, in fact, couples have married since it became law here in New Hampshire. The legislature passed it a couple of years ago, and they're trying to start families, some of them. Your position on same-sex adoption, obviously you are in favor of traditional families, but are you going to tell someone that they belong as a ward of the state or in foster care rather than have 2 parents who want them?
Well, this isn't a federal issue. It's a state issue, number one. The states can make that determination. In New Hampshire, my feeling is that this is an issue that should be done. I believe the issue of marriage itself is a federal issue, that we can't have different laws with respect to marriage. We have to have one law. Marriage is, as Newt said, a foundational institution of our country, and we have to have a singular law with respect to that. We can't have somebody married in one state and not married in another. If we were successful in establishing that, then this issue becomes moot. If we don't have a federal law, I'm certainly not going to have a federal law that bans adoption for gay couples when there are only gay couples in certain states. So this is a state issue, not a federal issue.
Well, let me ask you to follow up on that, if you don't mind, Senator. With those 1,800, if we have a federal constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage, what happens to the 1,800 families who have married here? Are their marriages basically illegitimate at this point?
If we have a constitution, if the Constitution says marriage is between a man and a woman, then marriage is between a man and a woman, and therefore that's what marriage is and would be in this country. And those who are not men and women who are married would not be married. That's what the Constitution would say.
If I could come back to the living room question again, Governor Romney, would you weigh in on the Yahoo question about what you would say sitting down in your living room to a gay couple who say, we simply want to have the right to, as the person who wrote the email said, we want gay people to form loving, committed, long-term relations. It's in human terms, what would you say to them?
Well, the answer is that that's a wonderful thing to do, and that there's every right for people in this country to form long-term, committed relationships with one another. That doesn't mean that they have to call it marriage, or they have to receive the approval of the state and a marriage license and so forth for that to occur. There can be domestic partnership benefits or a contractual relationship between two people, which would include, as Speaker Gingrich indicated, hospital visitation rights and the like. We can decide what kinds of benefits we might associate with people who form those kind of relationships, state by state. But to say that marriage is something other than the relationship between a man and a woman, I think is a mistake. And the reason for that is not that we want to discriminate against people or to suggest that gay couples are not just as loving and can't also raise children well, but it's instead a recognition that for society as a whole, the nation presumably will be better off if children are raised in a setting where there's a male and a female. And there are many cases where that's not possible. Divorce, death, single parents, gay parents, and so forth. But for a society to say we want to encourage, through the benefits that we associate with marriage, people to form partnerships between men and women and then raise children, which we think that will be the ideal setting for them to be raised.
Speaker Gingrich has to weigh in.
I just want to raise, since we spent this much time on these issues, I just want to raise a point about the news media bias. You don't hear the opposite question asked. Should the Catholic Church be forced to close its adoption services in Massachusetts because it won't accept gay couples, which is exactly what the state has done? Should the Catholic Church be driven out of providing charitable services in the District of Columbia because it won't give in to secular bigotry? Should the Catholic Church find itself discriminated against by the Obama administration on key delivery of services because of the bias and the bigotry of the administration? The bigotry question goes both ways, and there's a lot more anti-Christian bigotry today than there is concern on the other side, and none of it gets covered by the news media.
As you can tell, the people in this room feel that Speaker Gingrich is absolutely right, and I do too. And I was in a state where the Supreme Court stepped in and said marriage is a relationship required under the Constitution for people of the same sex to be able to marry. And John Adams, who wrote the Constitution, would be surprised. And it did exactly as Speaker Gingrich indicated. What happened was Catholic Charities that placed almost half of all the adoptive children in our state was forced to step out of being able to provide adoptive services. And the state tried to find other places to help children. We have to recognize that this decision about what we call marriage has consequence which goes far beyond a loving couple wanting to form a long-term relationship. That they can do within the law now. Calling it marriage creates a whole host of problems for families, for the law, for the practice of religion, for education. Let me say this: 3,000 years of human history shouldn't be discarded so quickly.